Me, a bro.
Yep.
He, a dude.
That's good stuff. All right. Let's try it. Okay. Welcome to the We Will Journey podcast. We're talking about faith and life as it happens, and not the glossy exterior we wish it was.
Oh.
What, man? What did I do wrong?
No, I think you said it's because all the things I was thinking about before. But we can edit that. You got that part good.
Oh.
You got it good. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Okay, just...
Now it's your turn.
Good.
Yeah.
Wait. We're going to get under the surface. I should have said all those things before. We should have waited down and dirty until after we read this part.
Okay.
Okay. Wait. We get under the surface and explore the down and dirty. Okay. Maybe we should. It doesn't have to be word for word, right?
No. I mean, I gave an interpretation.
Okay. All right. We get under the surface and explore the down and dirty of life as it pertains to our beliefs, our relationships, politics, and absolutely everything else.
Oh, there we go. That was good. All right. Welcome to today's discussion. Today we're actually joined by one of Seth's friends, Joshua Friedli. He's originally from Switzerland, but he grew up in Innsbruck, Austria, where Seth lives, and he currently resides there with his wife. He leads local youth ministry, and he's an economics major. So we look forward to our discussion with Joshua.
Three, two, one.
So a lot of people have a question about the Christian faith and about other religions as well. And the question that I would say is pretty predominant in both of our cultures and maybe around the world to some extent is, do all roads lead to God? And I'm actually, I phrased it exactly as an article that I read here recently by Greg Boyd. And if you don't know who Greg Boyd is, he's a theologian from Minnesota, actually. And he has a podcast called Renew, which is spelled Reknew. So he tackles that question in like a page and a half. It's pretty brief. But for Christians, this stems from a passage in the New Testament from the book of John. It's chapter 14, verse 6. Essentially what that verse says is it says that the only way to God is through Jesus. So for anybody that would have that idea that, there's a lot of ways to get to God, that verse seems to make it pretty exclusive, that no, there aren't a lot of ways, and that really the only way to God is through Jesus. So that's something that our culture seems to really struggle with, because culturally we want to be kind of open to everything, and we don't want to exclude anybody. And I think that thought process in some ways is really good, that we don't want to exclude anybody, and we do want to engage with everyone. So then, as a Christian, when we come down with kind of this hard and fast line that we draw in the sand, so to speak, of, well, the only way to God, though, is through Jesus, that seems to irritate people and cause them to maybe have some feelings to anybody that would really hold to that thought process. And I just wanted to say, too, like this conversation today, I don't think anybody here, the three of us, we're not experts in world religion as a whole. I grew up in a Christian home, and I still identify with the Christian faith. Seth, you grew up in a Christian home, and you identify with the Christian faith. And Joshua, I'm not for sure what you're... what your background has been for sure, but I know for a period of time anyways, you've identified as Christian. And so none of us really come from, a different religious background, and we've converted to the Christian faith. So we do speak from kind of you were talking just earlier before we started recording, Joshua, about a narrow, being really focused. And we have kind of like a narrow past as far as we haven't experienced a lot of other religions. And for me, where I've grown up in the Midwest of the United States, like most people that I encounter it's not Christianity, it's like different denominations within Christianity that differentiate us, So even in my context, it's primarily Christian in general. So we have to kind of acknowledge that we're going to come at this from a point of view that may not be as broad as what some may like to see. But I think at the same time, we're all three of us pretty open-minded, and we do embrace people from other cultures and other religions and love them and really try to understand, their points of view too. And I know in Innsbruck, Austria, where you guys are, you probably actually experience more of that than I do. Anyway, so what are your guys' experiences with this? Is this a question that you encounter on a fairly regular basis?
One thing I would say is yes, and a lot of different aspects, I guess. I have a lot of Muslim friends and acquaintances. They do often say we're basically the same. The only difference is, you have Jesus, I have Muhammad. But even they would say, Jesus is a good person, and Jesus is an important figure, and we also, look at Jesus as someone who was wise. They would not see him as the Son of God, but they would see him as a good person or a prophet. But they see, our God is Jesus' Father. For them, Jesus is a good figure, and their God would be Allah. But they might say to me, yeah, God is the same as your God, Mm-hmm. We don't need to discuss anything around it. We both believe in God, that's fine. And then they'll point to Moses being someone that we both have as someone, or Abraham, figures throughout history that a lot of religions would look to as important people in their beliefs. And so I do have people, and I understand that, trying to find a common ground when talking about those things, because just like anybody who wants to get into an argument about what you believe this and I believe this and whatever, and I don't want that either. But even trying to start a conversation about religion, a lot of times with my Muslim friends, we'll kind of end up in that, why does it matter? We both believe in God. We don't need to discuss it any further. I have also a lot of non-Christian friends who would say, yeah, he believes this, she believes that, that person is Buddhist, that person is Catholic, this person is Muslim. But in the end, as long as they're faithful to what they believe in, as long as they're not harming people, it doesn't really matter. Everybody kind of has their path, and that's cool. So those are kind of, I guess, two of the...
Mm-hmm. There is that argument of as long as somebody's not, really bothering anybody, why bother them? And I think anytime anybody from whatever religion they affiliate with is trying to persuade that it can be seen as kind of well, why are you even doing this? Because, who are they bothering? And so that can be, especially in our culture today, of kind of this live and let live. We're more science-based and technology-based. Those things are more predominant in our, as far as being just kind of at the top of mind type things. So religion seems kind of archaic anyways, I think, to modern culture. Why you would be bothering anybody with religion and kind of pressing in on it doesn't really make a lot of sense to people. Is that kind of how you see it too?
Yeah, that's 100%. I mean, what I see, if you look at worldview wise, what I realize, most people, even though they may have a religion, that they grow up in and they somewhat believe their worldview is deeply secular. If you want to tell them what is true or what is not true, they're only going to believe in what like a university is going to tell you or a professor. So if you, any pastor or a monk or anything is not going to be an authority about what is true or what is not true, but rather how to have a spiritual experience or not. So what I see in especially in Europe, religion is no longer a source for truth that we can untrue or not true, because that would be a huge fight. That would be a problem if I would come in and say this is actually true, then you have to prove facts. But the discussion about religion here has shifted from is something true or not to does it bring me a spiritual experience? And if you're not into spiritual experiences and because you, I don't know, don't seek them, just an atheist, then you just don't care. And if you are a spiritual person, then it's fine with you. And then it doesn't matter if one Bible says, I'm the only way, because that's just your way of getting your spiritual experience. And it doesn't really bother the Buddhist or the Muslim person if you yourself have a very exclusive religion, as long as, because it's not even about if is your religion true or not, is your religion giving you a religious experience, a spiritual experience. So religion is banned basically from the realm of being true into does it, in the very pragmatic question, does it give me something? Does it work for me? Does it give me, and then it doesn't really matter if it's exclusive or not, because you may say that this is your way and your only way, but I don't really care, because it's not about if it's a true statement or not. It's more, does it work? And that's very different for a lot of kind of people. And that's what I see a lot when I talk to a stranger also, when I tell them, yeah, I believe in Jesus. They're like, yeah, that's fine for you. If this works for you, that's fine. And I'm like, what's work? It doesn't really matter if it works, right? It should be true. But they don't think in that category regarding the religion at all. And I think that's very interesting. That's the reason why we can be so tolerant about so many different religions, because they don't matter to us. I mean, if someone challenges a basic truth about liberal secularism, like, I don't know, we want to get rid of democracy, or I don't want to do that, but if someone says something like that, people are going to be angry, and people are going to say, this is our facts. The people are so angry with alternative fact people who want to, who say the earth is flat, or I don't know, have conspiracy theories. People are angry with those people, and they argue against them very hard and say, no, you're not right. And they are fact-checking Trump really hard because they want to see where he lies and what is not true and true, because that's their actual idea of a libertarian secular system. But as a religion, and you say only my religion is true, you don't threaten their idea. You're just kind of being old-fashioned, not knowing that your religion is just a way of spirituality.
Hey guys, it's Seth. Some of you might be wondering, I wish there was a way to follow these guys and what they're up to. Well, I don't know if you heard about a little thing called the internet. That's right, if you check us out at twitter.com/WeWillJourney1, you'll be able to keep updated on what we're up to and maybe some future interviews or projects we're working on. Catch yous later.
So there's a book that I haven't read all of it, but I've read probably about half of it, called Homo Deus. Have you guys heard of that book?
I heard of it.
And I will really butcher the author's name, but he's a professor from Israel, Yuval Noah Harari. I don't know if I'm saying that quite right, but
yeah, sure.
Does sound close enough. But anyways, Joshua, yeah, he kind of dives into that whole thought process that you just talked about, and he talks about the fact that prior to science and medicine and technology, people needed God because they didn't have any other source really to draw from. It was kind of like their hope. But now our hope has been replaced by science, technology, and medicine. We don't need God like we used to need God. So that whole religion debate, kind of like what you were talking about, Joshua, is really not even necessary because now we put our hope in science, and we put our hope in things that we can actually kind of see and touch and all those sensory things too, and we can actually see the science and the technology that stems from the science, and so yeah, he just kind of draws on that very same thought process, is that it's just not really needed anymore. But yeah, if it makes you feel good, then sure, whatever. And so that definitely opens the door to a lot of experiences, which I think we see that too, don't we? Like in our culture today, we see just kind of a vast array of spiritual experiences. And I think you'll meet more people today that instead of affiliating with a religion, they just call themselves spiritual. Is that true there too?
Yeah, I mean, at times for sure. You have both. There's now a very large Muslim population in Innsbruck, in Austria, and usually I would say Muslims would definitely say they're Muslim, especially those who are
more conservative or not as long.
Yeah, that those who are in a family that's Muslim and grown up in that and go to their the mosque and stuff like that, they would definitely have no issue, saying that very, very right out and not sugarcoating anything. And same thing with probably older conservative Catholics. I think they would always say they're Catholic. There's not a lot of young Catholics anymore, but once in a while I'll meet one who's maybe really passionate or excited about it. But a lot of people that I would talk to around my age that are Catholic would say, I grew up in a Catholic family, or I'm Catholic by name, but I'm not really involved. And I'm just more like that. You said, like, some people will say, like, I'm just kind of spiritual.
Right.
Or I don't need a organization. I don't need a foundation. I don't need a group to be a part of. I can do this on my own. Yeah. There's probably a few groups that they would have no problem. And you would hear definitely right away, without hesitation, that's what they kind of believe in, or that's what they adhere to. But then there's a big pool of people who are somewhere in the middle of some of those groups who are just kind of like, whatever, I'm spiritual. I believe, karma, things like that. There's a lot of people who are interested in different Eastern ideals and beliefs. I don't know how many of them really take it that seriously or know that much about it, but I've talked to people who definitely have that mindset of just do good to others, be kind, and you'll be taken care of, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think also, the problematic thing is also, philosophically, when you see, like, where people a long time in history thought about how do we know what we know, or how do you get to truth. And like the mainstream here in Europe with Kant and then the existentialists basically got to the conclusion there is no way that anybody can know about absolute truth. And a lot of people that I would argue about my faith, they would also tell me, like, Joshua, you're very naive if you think your perspective, is absolute and true, because there's no possible way to know if anything is true, except it is obvious. Like if I pull down like science, the sun is obvious. Sometimes not, but that's the reason why it's so popular. It makes sense to a lot of people and it's reproducible, so you can kind of prove it. But with a lot of other things, it's very, very hard to prove anything. And that is also the notion that the belief in absolute truth, that there is something that is true for everyone, is also very small, I guess. And before you can argue there is only one way, because this is the true side, I guess the most arguments that I have to take first is that there's only one single truth that is out there, and not everyone can make their own truth. Interesting enough, that we got preached that message, there's no real truth out there, a long time. But it changed when a lot of right-wing people started to make up their own truths. And then all of a sudden, especially journalists are very keen on, hey, there's only one truth. And it's interesting how, some people take obvious, not true facts and say to them, yeah, that's true for me, And that's, I think it's an unintended result from those people who are like pushing their relative truth storyline.
Right.
And now I'm kind of regretting it because now even obvious things that are obvious a lie are being tolerated because they say, wow, this is just your opinion or just your perspective. And that is, I think, a problem that we kind of lost this sense that there is a single theory that there is, and everything else is wrong. That is not an idea that a lot of people hold, especially in postmodernism, where people say you cannot even say anything without being ambiguous. Even if people listen to our podcast, they will understand things differently than we mean it because, I don't know, they come from different culture or understand words differently. And even though this is made true, there is only, I do believe that there is only very few interpretations of that are viable. There are a million things you can interpret one sentence, but only probably two viable ways to interpret a sentence.
Email. That's right, I said email. Seems like everybody's got one these days, even us. So if you want to get in contact with us or chat about the weather, you can shoot us an email at wewilljourney.connect@gmail.com. Look forward to hearing from you or reading from you.
So I think the point we have to eventually get to, people probably have to get to, is there has to be some truth, right? So like either gravity exists or it doesn't exist. It can't be both, right? So like gravity can't exist and also not exist at the same time, can it? So either one of those things has to be true. Either the sun comes up or it doesn't. There are some things in our world that are true that we can't really argue, and we have to eventually get to a point, I would think, where we would be honest with ourselves enough to like start questioning that thought process of, well, everything is up for grabs. Nothing really has to be true. Like eventually we have to have some self-reflection that would take place, I would think, at some point in time and say, well, no, there are some things that are true, and there are some things that, like, we can't really argue. They happen. So I would think eventually we'd get to that point. I just read a book called Fool's Talk by Os Guinness. He is a Christian apologist, and he kind of puts it, I think, in a really good way when just talking about people and how we choose to live our lives. Either we look at the world, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm not reading directly from what he wrote, but he says either we look at the world and recognize that there is a set of truths to the world, and then we basically modify our life based on those truths, or we can basically build our own belief system, and then we modify our world to that belief system. Either we kind of make up our own truths, or we build our lives around that, or we actually acknowledge that there is truth and we kind of adapt our lives to what is actually true. And I think that's the path, people eventually have to go down, right? I don't think, can you live your whole life in just total oblivion to the truth?
I was going to say, I find really fascinating as we have this conversation. I think about the fact that I think a lot of people our age, or a lot of people my age and younger, would maybe criticize the older generation, or I'd say my parents' generation, their parents, with the fact that maybe they weren't critical thinkers. They kind of just, like, for example, a lot of people would just work a job or go to a church, and that's where they would be until they retired or passed away. Right? It was that this is what I'm doing. Every Sunday I go to church. Every weekday I work from 6 to 3. I come home, kind of like a lot of consistency, but not like I feel like a lot of people now would say, oh, they weren't really thinking critically, like, what I'm doing, does this make sense? Is this enjoyable? Is this true? The funny thing with that is, in those criticisms, which lead to, like we're talking about, I think people just having a very broad and open mindset of, everybody can kind of question things and look for their own path, their own truth. That's what you hear all the time is, my truth, which makes no sense, right? If you're in court and you're trying to find out if someone committed the crime and says like, well, my truth is that this happened, and someone else says, well, my truth is this happened. That's not going to solve anything. They need facts. They need evidence. And so that's interesting that now, as people shift this idea of like, well, we don't want to be stuck in any kind of religious organization. We don't want to be stuck in a job, even with family and marriages. It's the same deal. I don't want to. Why should I marry someone that confines me, that keeps me from having other options? And the funny thing with that is without having any convictions, you're also kind of in a wishy-washy place, right? Like how is that better than being committed to something and being steadfast in what you believe in, when you don't have any beliefs? Then if you actually sit down and think about like what truth is and what's important, and you just have kind of an empty bowl with nothing in it, then that's not really any better. That's not leading to something higher or something more spiritual. That's just
empty.
And so it's interesting, like, because I see both sides. I see, like, for me, my dad working 25 years at a job he didn't enjoy. I did that for a year. What he did, working at a factory.
Yeah.
And I knew, that's not what I want to do, so I'm not going to stay here. But at the same time, like, that consistency led him to have a much better job after that. Those years of consistency, and he had time. I can look around and try to find the perfect job. That's also going to cost a lot of time. It's not just the fact of like, I get to find what I love. It's also a lot of effort to find that. And I think as we talk about religion and spirituality, I believe that I found the truth, and that's Jesus. And there's a lot of people that are searching and searching and searching, and Christianity might sound good, but the thing that holds them up from that is the idea of not wanting to get stuck, not wanting to get confined to this one truth or this one belief.
Mm-hmm.
What I found interesting, you argue that we have to be truth seekers. And what I found interesting, that especially young people accuse a lot of Christians of being not the whole anti-vaxxer movement, a lot of conspiracy theories, and also a lot of people who just believe really weird stuff, to Christians who denying science facts, or even some Christians who are flat earthers, whereas been quiet, But I think there is some portion to it that, as you said, like they accuse us widely of making our words to the worldview that we have, and not look at the facts that observation and science brings, but just to model the world around our Bible that we hold dearly. And I do believe this is to some extent a valid criticism, where we are very narrow in our perception. This is true. And I actually would like to challenge like some people to like get out of their narrow worldview and let the real facts challenge their beliefs. And for my part, I can say, it only makes my faith grow stronger,
Right.
And I do believe that it actually makes us also more whole and more stable if we, don't have so much fear from confrontation with other people too and other ideas, and also can see that other people have truths too. I mean, this is something that I think is also, it's sometimes something that aggravates other people looking at Christians, that they are like, have like this, we're sent from God, we know everything. And there are beautiful things and truths that Buddhism discovered. They're not that truths, like Jesus is the truth from my perspective, but they discovered some things that are true, like, I don't know, that meditation is probably a good thing for your brain and helps you relax. I don't know, that is that is probably true, and that is not what Christianity discovered, but Buddhism. But still, I think we have to get this openness that there are other sources from truth than just the Bible. And I mean, I think we had it in the past, but as we get more and more attacked from the scientific community, we got more and more, we had the feeling we had to defend our faith, and we had to, refute their theories. And I think that is actually not a helpful approach. I think we should be open to also be critical of our own mindset and say, hey, could I be wrong, And I think God is so much bigger, and the Bible is so much bigger. It does not have to be contained to our particular worldview that we hold. Mm-hmm. And I realized that a lot of things that people tell me are also Christian. I think I'm afraid of how many Christians are believers in conspiracy theories. That is a pattern that I see a lot of. That the more religious a friend is, the more vulnerable he is to conspiracy theories. And I think that is a problem, because we're more prone to just believing what people tell, and not because they're good friends of us. And I think is a problem where I think if we would be more accepting to facts outside, I think, and more observing too, what is truth actually, I think we would be more believable and more in touch, and also be less aggressive, because we would be not that afraid from other people that have different meanings, but could be more like, hey, I can hear what you say. It sounds logical. Let's hear it out. Who is right, and how that integrates in how we can bring things together, and not like, you're wrong, because I would like what you say, and your facts threaten my worldview.
Are you digging our theme music? Well, we dig it too. You can check out more Jane Gilman music at our website, janegilman.com, or you can download some of her music to your playlist on iTunes. That's GILLMAN. And I'm not a scientific person by any stretch of the imagination, but I really appreciate it. And the more that I read or watch, or whatever the case may be, there's definitely an element to a lot of the science that is taking place that just really helps us find God to be more believable, in my mind. Instead of leading us away from God, I really feel like a lot of science today is leading us directly to God. And archaeology and all these different things really give us an opportunity to appreciate who God is and his creativity, and also appreciate the story, right, that he's given us through the Bible. It just seems to, in my mind, do more for that. I like that podcast called Unbelievable, and I think I said his name was Jamie something the other day, Seth, when we were talking, and I was totally off. It's Justin. I think it's Justin Brierly. And I hope I said his last name right. I probably said it wrong. But a lot of times, typically the normal setup for that podcast is an atheist of some kind and a Christian of some kind. And if they're both scientists, I always find that interesting because they agree almost on everything. Typically, they may talk about it a little differently, and then they'll talk through it, and they're like, oh, yeah, we pretty much agree. And then they come down to the very end, and the atheist will typically say something to the effect of, that's just not really the answer that I want it to be. I don't want God to be the answer, because they always get to some place and it's an unknown place. And there isn't really any concrete answer to this place that they get to. And so typically what they'll say is like, I just don't want God to be the answer for that thing that I can't explain right now. So at the end of the podcast, they always say, well, if we could provide you indisputable evidence, and your mind would show you clearly that God is in that place that you can't explain, would you then kind of concede and say, yeah, God does exist? And they're like, pretty sure I just keep looking for another answer. So I think science really is doing a lot if you're willing to view that as an option. So if you're willing to view God as a plausible option, then I think science can actually do a lot to kind of show somebody like, oh yeah, God does exist. But if you're not open to that, then I think it just kind of continues to lead you down that other path of like, I'm just going to look for another answer other than God. But here's what I think is interesting, guys, and you can tell me what your thoughts are on this, because, our culture tells us that God is not the answer, right? Like God is not, religion and faith. That's not something that would provide ultimate happiness. There's a better way to do life. There's a better way to go about our lives kind of as a global community. Yet, prescription drug companies that make antidepressants seem to be doing really well. They're selling a lot of antidepressants, and suicide, something that instead of going down, it's going up. And people, like we've already talked about, Seth, you kind of alluded to it. I think what you were talking about there with your dad, and his job and other people like him being willing to stay with something for a longer period of time, whether it be a career or marriage. Maybe I'm looking at it the wrong way, but would maybe contentment have something to do with that, being more content? So instead of being more content, we're less content, and we always are kind of moving towards and to other things to try to be more content, and we're on more medications, and we're finding life less meaningful instead of more meaningful. Isn't this the opposite of what should be happening if the worldview that we're kind of trying to go to was actually true? Like, if that was actually true, wouldn't we need fewer antidepressants, and wouldn't there be less suicide, and wouldn't we be more content?
It's really a good thought, because when I think of it as a Christian, and I think that's what we have as Christians is we have a Father in heaven, as we would say, to our God, who provides. He's the one that makes all things. He's the one, as Job, a character in the Bible, said, he gives and takes away. If we believe that, and we know that, and we know, like, okay, he's the one that's going to ultimately be in control, then you can kind of go through life and make decisions and be okay with those, knowing that, like, I can't ultimately control things. I can't make happiness. I can't, like, create something, because God is the creator. God is the one who knows everything. He's the one that put me here. He's the one that's going to ultimately provide for me. In him, I can find joy. In him, I can find peace. In him, I can find contentment, which, I have in my life. And then all those other things you're talking about, or that we're discussing, well, what if I do this? Maybe I'll be a little bit happier, or a little bit more successful, or I won't be stuck. Or I found a woman, but that girl's pretty attractive. Maybe I was a little too quick in my decision making, like all those kind of things. We still have those, right? I think every Christian man still has the same thoughts as everybody else. Like, well, what about this, or what about that? But I have the overarching in everything that I do and all decisions I make. I have this knowledge and this conviction that God is above me. God is in control, and God is ultimately the only one that can provide contentment in my life. And so I've been able to overcome a lot of those other fleeting thoughts and what I would say temptations, and be, faithful to my wife, and be consistent in relationships with, obviously, I struggle too. I'm not always the best husband, the best father, the best worker. But I think the advantage that we have as Christians is we have our Father in heaven, who is creator and who is provider and who knows all things and sees all things. And for me, that's always such a peace and something that's so valuable, just to know, like, oh, he's got it. I'm not in control of finding this perfect job or perfect relationship, because even those of us who don't believe there is a God, I'm pretty sure everyone would have to admit, like, yeah, there's not a perfect woman out there. There's not a perfect guy out there. There's not a perfect job out there. And so I think, as we were hitting before, like this sense of like needing to try out everything and not wanting to get stuck anywhere also leads to a lot of empty feelings. And instead of a place where it's like, oh, I'm fulfilled, it's a place, oh, this is good, but I think there's something better. Like that continual searching.
I wanted to say something quickly. What you said before, that scientists on the show would always want to look further. And I mean, I can to some extent deeply understand that, because one big problem why science didn't advance for a long time in the Middle Ages was because the answer was always God on to everything. And when people stopped answering every question with God and started to looking deeper, they discovered new things. And I think for a scientist, it's always important to kind of look more into it, even though they don't know it, because if they would not, they would stop progressing in their field. And I think that would be the end of science. So I think as a scientist who is not lazy, it's kind of your job to not to accept God as an answer, because then you would kind of, end your career. Like, it's just God, I can stop now. But what I think for me, the big thing that religion brings to me is not more an explanation on how things work in the world. Science is awesome in bringing us, how does grass grow? How does a computer work? How does a vaccine work? I appreciate science for that. But what science can never do is, like, how does it started? Like, there's a Big Bang, but who did start the Big Bang? Like, who starts the nothing to something? Is there any meaning? And this is right back to where Seth is. I think that's the big thing, that it means there's so many poems and thinkers who are like just derived. There is meaningless. Basically, there is no meaning in the world. You're just a small speck of dust on a huge universe, and you just don't matter. There's no meaning in your life. You can basically just party your whole life. Doesn't make a difference, because your life has no meaning. And I think this is the biggest reason why people are depressed, because they don't have meaning in their lives, and they don't see that their life has any value or any purpose. They just see that they're like one small person in a vast ocean of complex relations that doesn't mean anything. They're just random noise that somehow originated because of a mistake of the first particle. I don't know. So, and I think also this ought to be, like, there's this huge war nowadays between liberals and conservative people, what it ought to be, how should we live? Is this a good rule or is this not, and I see how there now all of this kind of new rules, especially in this rape culture, women try to protect themselves from men, so they're establishing new rules. And I read an article of a liberal person who wanted to establish a contract before sex, so the girl has to sign a contract before they can have sex, because that would protect girls more. And then I thought, wait a minute, this already exists. There is something called marriage, which is kind of a contract that you sign before you have sex. So to me, what the great power of Christianity nowadays and religion, I think if you're somebody who says, I want to know how the earth is created, so I look in the Bible, I would beg you to be cautious with that. I mean, it can give you a sense like God created it. It tells you that, but how exactly it panned out, Bible is not a science book. But if you want to look at meaning, what is your meaning in this world? Then Genesis is a very powerful answer in that. You're here to rule the earth, to look after earth, to be a steward, and you're a person that ought to be loved by God and have a good life, but we kind of screwed it up. And that's what I really think is so powerful, is really the meaning and also how it should be. I know a lot of people that are really confused right now as making up new rules on how to behave so that people not get raped. And there are already, I think, pretty good ought to be rules in the Bible. And if we would follow them, and obviously there's a lot of hypocrisy, obviously there's rape in marriages too, and the rules are not perfect. But I say if on a personal level people would adhere to that value system, yeah, and also find the meaning that the Bible delivers, I think society as a whole will benefit actually greatly. And if we look at social sciences that try to figure out how the ought to should be, then I see even like economists make a sport out of ridiculing social sciences because they are ridiculous and publishing just everything. There was even one economist I think it was a physicist. He just faked the paper. He did no research. He just made up a story, sent it to a publisher, and he just published it. They just published the paper even though it was a fake. And there was a group who actually redid that experiment, and they wanted to publish as many papers as they could before somebody would stop them. They actually did until a journalist read an article, and then they find out that the person who was actually the author didn't even exist. So they even made up the name of the author, and a journalist found it out, and they contacted the sociological journal, and they were like, what's going on, guys? And then the whole story flew up. So I think that, there are obviously, I'm not going to say that all sociologists are frauds, but I think that if you're going to like the ought to from science, I think we can be very suspicious if everything that they're saying is true. And then on the other hand, I see a lot of people who say like telling the truth is a good thing. Trust is very important. Forgiveness is very important. More and more people are coming up with those ideas that are already found in the Bible a long time ago. And people are like, wow, there's this awesome new thing. And Christians are like, new? I don't know. We're teaching that since 2,000 years, but...
I was thinking, Joshua, when you were talking about Buddhism and meditation as being something that Buddhism kind of came up with, but I was thinking of what popped into my brain was meditating on God's word day and night. Now, why would somebody want to do that? And I think you can, instead of saying God's word, you could probably interject another word, truth, meditating on truth day and night. And because God's word is true, and I know that's my perspective, and I know I grew up in a Christian home, and I've continued in the faith, and that is how I see it. But I think that's a more hopeful worldview for sure, because Scripture also says that we were wonderfully made. There's a lot of messages in this world today that really can bring a person down. But if I can meditate on the fact that I was wonderfully made in the image of God, like that's going to do something to my psyche that some of these other messages in our world today, they'll have a radically different effect. So to me, Scripture offers us a brighter future, right? And a different perspective on things, and a different way of looking at the world than many times what this world offers to us. And like you were saying, Seth, when we do follow some of these things, so when we do say, instead of jumping ship from this relationship, I'm going to stick it out. There's like fruits that can be had from sticking it out in a relationship. Or instead of job hopping, I'm going to stick it out with this job. There's things that will maybe happen from that would not have happened otherwise. And so we can start realizing some of these benefits and seeing where Scripture is not really leading us away from truth and down this path of kind of an archaic belief system that has no relevance, but it actually enriches our life and makes it fuller. When we start to realize some of those things, it's pretty powerful, I think. And I think that's probably where the three of us are today, is we've realized enough of that in our life that now continuing in the faith is easier. I'm not saying it's easy. It's easier to continue in the faith after having realized some of those truths and seeing them play themselves out and like, oh yeah, God was right. He wasn't wrong. He was right. And I can actually see it now. This may be a good place to kind of end here, but I think Greg Boyd, in that article that we started off this conversation with called Do All Roads Lead to God? He says here, the bottom line is that there is only one way the world is. And the set of true statements are those and only those that reflect this one way. So the content of what one believes about reality will always necessarily be narrow. Even the truth claim that all roads lead to God is actually a very narrow claim. Either this claim reflects reality or it doesn't. Either it's true or it's false. This has to be decided on the basis of available evidence and relevant arguments. But the claim itself is no less narrow than the claim that there's only one way to God, or 3, or 7, etc. In other words, the claim that all roads lead to God rules out an infinite number of alternative claims, just as every other truth claim does. Joshua, I appreciate you being on the call with us today. Seth, I still appreciate you too.
What I say is more better than what you say.
I've got a mother, a sister, and a brother who have gone home to that sweet home. Well, I'm determined to go and see them, a good Lord, over on that distant shore. As I go down to that river of Jordan, just to bathe my weary soul. If I could just touch the hem of his garment, good Lord, I believe it would make me whole. When I'm dead, laying in my coffin, all my friends all gather round. They can say I'm just sleeping, good Lord, the sweet peace I have found.